I was lying in a hospital bed, completely still, completely silent. And I heard my husband say, "How much longer do we have to keep her alive?" Let that sink in for a moment. Not when will she wake up? Not is she going to be okay? But how much longer do we have to keep her alive? And the worst part? Nobody in that room said a word to stop him. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, maybe you misheard. Maybe it was the medication, the machines, the fog of whatever a coma does to a person's mind. But I didn't mishear anything. I heard every single word. And I remembered every single one. My name is Diane, 32 years old. A woman who, 6 months before that hospital room, had everything she thought she ever wanted. A home, a husband, a family that showed up for Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and birthdays with cards that said, "We love you" in cursive. I was a graphic designer, self-employed. I worked from home mostly. Coffee in the morning, music in the background, deadlines that were my own to manage. I liked the quiet. I liked the independence. I had built a life that felt like mine. That was the first thing they took from me. The feeling that anything in my life was actually mine. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because this story, like all stories that destroy you slowly, didn't start with a hospital bed. It started with a house. 3 years before the accident, my grandmother passed away. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack until the very end, and she left me her house. Not my mother, not my aunt, not any of the cousins who showed up at holidays with casseroles and loud opinions. Me. She left it to me because, as her will stated, and I have read these words so many times I could recite them in my sleep, Diane is the only one who ever sat with me just to sit, not to ask for anything, just to be here. I cried for a week when I read that. The house was worth about $480,000 at the time. Modest neighborhood, good bones, paid off completely. She'd lived there for 40 years. It smelled like lavender and old books, and something I've never been able to name but always associated with safety. I didn't sell it. I couldn't. I moved in 6 months later, after my apartment lease ended. And that is when Marcus came into my life. Marcus. Let me tell you something about Marcus. He was the kind of man who made you feel chosen. That's the only word for it. Chosen. Like out of every person in the world, he had looked around and decided, you're the one. He was charming in a way that didn't feel like performance. He remembered small things. The name of my 3rd grade teacher I mentioned once in passing. The way I liked my coffee. Oat milk, no sugar, just a little too hot. He brought me books he thought I'd love. He called when he said he would call. I was careful with him. I want you to know that. I wasn't naive. I had been through enough relationships to know that charm is not the same as character. I watched him for months before I let myself fall, and I fell hard. We got married 2 years after we met. Small ceremony, backyard of my grandmother's house, string lights and wildflowers, and about 30 people who meant something to us. It was the happiest day of my life. Or so I believed. The first sign, and I mean the very first sign that something was wrong, came about 4 months after the wedding. Marcus suggested we consolidate finances. His words, consolidate. It sounded so practical, so grown up, so reasonable for 2 married people building a life together. He said it would be easier for bills, for taxes, for long-term planning. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down numbers in 2 columns, his and mine, and showed me how combining everything would simplify our lives. I sat there and looked at that legal pad, and something in my stomach moved. Not a lurch, not a red flag flying, just a small, quiet shift, like a floorboard settling somewhere deep in the house. I agreed to a joint account for household expenses, but I kept my personal accounts separate. I said it was about having individual financial identity, a thing I had read once in a magazine and only half believed. Marcus smiled and said he understood completely, but his jaw tightened just slightly when he smiled. I filed that away and told myself I was being paranoid. Here's what I didn't know then. Marcus had debt, significant debt, the kind that comes from a previous life he had never fully disclosed. A failed business, a settlement from a lawsuit I still don't know all the details of. Credit cards with balances that would make your stomach drop. He had married me knowing about my grandmother's house, knowing about the equity, knowing about the inheritance. He had done the math before he ever brought me flowers. I didn't learn any of this until I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, listening to him explain it to my mother like it was perfectly logical. But we'll get there. My family. Let me tell you about my family. My mother, Sandra, a woman who loved appearance more than almost anything. She kept a beautiful home, dressed well, sent thank you notes within 48 hours of receiving gifts. She was not cruel. She was not evil. She was something almost more dangerous. She was weak in the places that mattered, and she dressed that weakness up as pragmatism. My younger brother, Tyler, 28. He and Marcus had become close quickly. Uncomfortably close, I see now. They watched sports together, went to the gym, had inside jokes I was never quite part of. Tyler struggled financially. He always had. And Marcus was generous with him in small ways, picking up dinner, lending him money he never formally asked to be repaid. I thought it was kindness. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who showed up for every family event and always seemed to know slightly more about my finances than she should have. I thought she was just nosy. She is that, but she was also something else. And then there was Greta, Marcus's mother, a small, precise woman who had never fully warmed to me, no matter how many dinners I cooked or birthdays I remembered. She looked at my grandmother's house the first time she visited and said, "This is lovely. What's it worth these days?" Not hello, not what a beautiful home. What is it worth? I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in October. I had been driving home from a client meeting, one of those rare in-person ones that always ran longer than scheduled. It was raining, the road curved, and then something happened that I still don't have a clear memory of, even now. The car went off the road, hit something, or something hit me. I woke up, if you can call it that, in a state I had no language for. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't open my eyes. But I could hear. Dimly at first, like sound coming through water. Then clearer. The doctors would later call it a covert consciousness state, a condition where the brain is active, aware, processing, even when the body shows no response. It's rare. It's terrifying. And it saved my life, because what I heard in that hospital room is what saved me. The first voice I recognized was Marcus. He was talking to someone. Another man, I thought. His voice was low, controlled, the way it got when he was performing calm. "The insurance policy is solid," he said. "Life and the property." I had her sign the updated beneficiary forms back in June. She didn't even read them. A pause. "The house alone is worth over $500,000 now. And there's the savings. My savings. My grandmother's savings that had passed to me. About $10,000 sitting in an account I had foolishly added him to after the first year of marriage because the financial advisor said it made estate planning simpler. I lay there in the dark behind my own eyelids and felt something I had no name for. Not panic. Panic moves. This was something colder. A stillness. An understanding settling into my bones like ice water. He was talking about my death like it was a transaction. The second conversation happened, I believe, 2 days later. My mother's voice. My mother, Sandra, who I had called every Sunday for my entire adult life. "The doctors say there's been no improvement," she was saying, "that it's been over a week and the brain activity is minimal." Marcus, cutting her off, smooth and efficient. "They're not optimistic." What does that mean, not optimistic? It means we should start thinking about what Diane would have wanted. A silence, then my mother, softer. "She never made a living will." "No," Marcus said. "She didn't. So those decisions fall to her next of kin, and to me as her husband." Another silence. I wanted to scream. I have never wanted anything as badly in my entire life as I wanted to scream in that moment. I focused everything I had on my hand, on one finger, on the concept of movement. Nothing happened. My body was not mine. I was a passenger locked in a dark room and someone else held the keys. "There's the matter of the estate," Marcus continued. "We should probably involve Patricia. She was close to Diane's grandmother and understands how the property was transferred. There may be complications if—" "Marcus," my mother's voice. Careful. What are you actually saying? A beat. I'm saying that keeping her on life support indefinitely is expensive and painful, and I don't think Diane would have wanted to live as a vegetable. He said, vegetable. The word hit me like a physical thing, and my mother said nothing for a very long time. And then she said, you might be right. I need to pause here, because I know what you're feeling right now. I felt it too. Trapped inside that feeling, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but absorb the horror of those words. You might be right. My mother, the woman who drove me to swim practice at 6 a.m. for 4 years, who sat with me through every heartbreak of my teenage years, who cried at my wedding. You might be right. There are moments that break the story of who you thought your life was. That was mine. But I want to be honest with you about something. Because this story, my story, isn't simple. And I don't want to tell it like it is. There was a part of me, in those dark hours, that wondered if they were right. Not about the money, not about the insurance, but about me. What if I didn't wake up? What if whatever had happened to my brain was permanent? What if the life I went back to, if I went back at all, was diminished in ways I couldn't yet imagine? I had seen suffering up close. My grandmother's final months, before the end came quickly and relatively peacefully, had included a period of confusion and frustration that had broken her spirit in small ways. She had told me once, clear-eyed and direct as she always was, Diane, if I ever lose my mind, don't keep me here for your sake. Let me go. So, I understood, in the abstract, the conversation about quality of life. But this wasn't that. What I was hearing wasn't mercy. I knew the difference between mercy and calculation. And what Marcus was speaking in was the language of calculation. Insurance policies, property transfers, estate complications. He wasn't asking whether I would want to live. He was asking how quickly they could move once I was gone. There's something nobody tells you about surviving a near-death experience. It changes the architecture of your fear. Before the accident, I was afraid of ordinary things. Rejection, failure, losing people I loved, the future and its 1,000 uncertainties. Lying in that hospital bed, I was afraid of only one thing. Not death, discovery. I was afraid that I would wake up before I had heard enough, that the machines would register something. A spike in brain activity, a change in breathing pattern, and they would stop talking. And I would come back to the world with fragments, with suspicions but no proof, with wounds but no weapon. So in the strangest, most desperate act of self-preservation I have ever performed, I stayed still. I chose consciously, in whatever limited way I was capable of choice, to remain as I was, to keep listening. And they kept talking. It was Tyler who told me the most. My brother, 28 years old and $40,000 in debt, and apparently willing to trade his sister's life for a cut of whatever Marcus was orchestrating. He came alone one afternoon. I know it was afternoon because the sounds of the hospital shifted in a particular way around that time. Quieter, the lunch rush of nurses and orderlies settling into something slower. He sat beside my bed. I could hear him breathing. He was close. Diane, he said quietly, I don't know if you can hear me. I can hear you, Tyler. I can hear every word. I want you to know that this isn't what I wanted, okay? This isn't. I tried to talk Marcus out of some of it. The timeline. He's moving too fast, and I told him that. The timeline. But the debt is real, Di. You don't know how bad it is. And Marcus, he's been carrying a lot. And when he came to me about the situation, I didn't think, the doctors aren't saying you're going to be okay. They're really not. And Patricia has this idea about the property and the way the deed is structured. It could actually... He stopped. He put his hand on top of mine. The sensation was distant, like feeling something through a thick winter coat. I love you, he whispered. I do. But I need you to understand that if you were awake, if you were yourself, you wouldn't want this life. You told me that once. You told me about Grandma and what she said about not being kept alive, and He was using my own words against me. My own words, spoken once, in love, about my grandmother, twisted into justification for what they were planning to do. I made a decision in that moment. I was going to wake up. Not immediately. Not yet. I still needed more, but I was going to wake up. And when I did, I was going to burn every single one of them down to the ground. Legally. Carefully. Completely. Please continue reading, because what happened next is where everything changed. It was on what I believe was the 11th or 12th day when I heard the voice I hadn't expected. A woman. Not my mother. Not a nurse. Someone whose footsteps were different. Deliberate. Unhurried. Like someone who owned the space she moved through. She sat down. There was the soft creak of the chair by the window, the one nobody else used. "Hello, Diane," she said. And something in my chest moved, because her voice was kind, genuinely kind. The kind you recognize immediately because it's rare. "My name is Dr. Lena Marsh. I'm a neurologist. I've been reviewing your scans." She paused. "I want to tell you something, and I'm going to say it directly to you even though everyone tells me you can't hear me. Because in my experience, in 22 years of doing this work, I believe some patients can hear more than we assume. I felt something then. Something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Your brain activity is not what they're telling your family," she said quietly. "There are patterns here that are inconsistent with a persistent vegetative state. I've flagged my concerns with the attending physician, but there are pressures on this case that I don't fully understand. And I want you to know that I am not going to stop advocating for you." She stood. "I'm going to fight for more time," she said. "And I need you to fight too. Whatever you have left, use it." She left. I lay there in the dark behind my eyes and I cried. I don't know if actual tears formed. I don't know if any monitor registered what was happening inside me, but I cried in the only way I could. Completely. Silently. And with my whole self. Someone knew. Someone was looking. Someone was not willing to let them win. Dr. Marsh became my invisible ally. Over the next several days, I pieced together, from fragments of overheard conversation, that she had requested additional neurological testing, that she had pushed back on the family's timeline, that she had brought in a colleague for a second opinion. Marcus was not happy. I heard him in the hallway once, his voice carrying the particular edge it always had when he was being opposed by someone he couldn't charm. "We understand she's being thorough," he said, "but this is prolonging a painful situation for our family. We've spoken to the hospital administrator. Dr. Marsh's assessment is part of the clinical record," another voice said. A man, formal, measured. "We're required to address her concerns before any decisions regarding life support can be made." "And how long will that take?" A pause. "As long as it takes." I think I loved that man in that moment. Whoever he was. Those 4 words. As long as it takes. 3 days after Dr. Marsh's visit, I moved my finger. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies, where the hand lifts and the music swells, and everyone in the room gasps. My index finger moved approximately 3 millimeters to the left, but a nurse saw it. She said, quietly to herself, not knowing I was listening, "Oh, just that. Oh." And then I heard her footsteps, quick and purposeful, leaving the room. The room felt different after that. Fuller. Like more people were paying attention to it. Like the air had shifted. I don't want to make this sound like a clean progression. Like each day brought a new breakthrough and the path from that hospital bed to justice was straight and clear. It wasn't. There were days when I couldn't access even that small movement. Days when the pain, and there was pain, deep and diffuse and exhausting, made everything else impossible. Days when Marcus's voice in the hallway made me feel like the walls were closing in and there was nothing I could do. There was one night, I believe it was around day 14, when I came closest to despair. Marcus had been there in the afternoon. He'd spoken to a doctor I didn't recognize. He'd used phrases like quality of life and her wishes and family consensus. He'd been calm, reasonable, devastatingly articulate. He was good at this. He was so good at performing the grieving husband that I almost doubted myself. Almost. And in the dark of that night, with the machines beeping their steady rhythms and the distant sounds of the hospital going on without me, I thought, what if this is it? What if I don't make it out? What if the finger movement was the extent of it, and my brain is already too damaged and I spend however long I have left listening and unable to act? What if they win? I let myself sit in that for a while. Because I think you have to. I think you have to look directly at your worst fear and let it be real for a moment. Let it have weight. Let it hurt. And then I thought about my grandmother, lavender and old books, the smell of safety. Diane is the only one who ever sat with me just to sit, not to ask for anything, just to be here. She had chosen me. She had trusted me with the evidence of her whole life. That house, that deed, those 40 years of accumulated living. She had believed I was someone who showed up. I was going to show up. By day 17, I could move 3 fingers on my left hand. Slowly, intentionally. A different nurse noticed first. A young woman named Kara, who I learned over the following days was the most observant person in that wing. "Dr. Marsh," I heard her say in the hallway, "I need you to come look at something." And then there was the soft sound of the door, and 2 sets of footsteps, and Dr. Marsh's voice saying very carefully, very quietly, "Diane, if you can hear me, move your fingers." I moved them. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I have ever experienced before or since. "Kara," Dr. Marsh said, "call neurology. Now." Now I have to tell you about what I did next, because this is the part that people don't expect. This is the part where the story turns. I did not immediately let them know how much I'd heard. I know what you're thinking. Why? Why not tell someone immediately? Because I am my grandmother's granddaughter, and she taught me something that I had almost forgotten in the fog of trust and love in marriage. She taught me that evidence is everything. She had been a legal secretary for 30 years. She used to say, "A feeling gets you nowhere. A document gets you somewhere." I needed documents. I needed to not be the traumatized woman in the hospital bed making wild accusations against her beloved husband. I needed to be the woman with proof. So I woke up slowly. I let them believe the recovery was fragile and uncertain. I was careful about what I showed and what I concealed. And while I did that, while I lay there performing confusion and gradual improvement, I listened for 3 more days. What I heard in those final 3 days before I officially woke up was the key that opened everything. Marcus on the phone with someone he called the guy from the firm. I didn't get a name, but I got enough. "The deed transfer needs to happen before she's awake enough to contest it," Marcus said. "If she comes back with full cognitive function, we have a problem." A pause. "I know there are risks. I'm managing the risks. The doctor situation is being handled." "The doctor situation is being handled." Dr. Marsh. He was trying to get Dr. Marsh off my case. Another pause. "She doesn't have to die," Marcus said. And here's the part that made my blood go cold in a completely different way. "She just has to be manageable. If she wakes up with enough damage, we still control the estate. Patricia's already got the power of attorney paperwork drafted." Power of attorney. Patricia. My aunt had drafted paperwork to control my estate while I was still alive, but incapacitated. I had underestimated all of them. I want you to understand something about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was grief. Deep, clean, devastating grief. Because this wasn't just about money. Money is simple. Money is just paper and numbers. This was about the fact that every person in my life who I had believed was there because they loved me had a calculation running underneath the love, a contingency plan, an exit strategy that was actually an entrance to something else. My husband had married me for a house and a policy. My brother had been recruited as an accomplice. My aunt had prepared legal documents to strip me of my autonomy. And my mother had sat in that room and said, "You might be right. Grief? Yes. But grief has a way of clarifying things, burning off the fog, leaving you with the hard, cold, clean shape of what you're going to do next." I woke up officially to the world, to the nurses, to the doctors, to my family on a Tuesday morning in November. I let my eyes open slowly. I let the light hurt them. I let my face do the confused, overwhelmed, where am I thing that was, and I want to be clear, not entirely performance. It was genuinely disorienting to go from the dark interior world of those 17 days to the actual room, the actual faces, the actual reality of being seen. Kara was there. I saw her first. And then Dr. Marsh standing just behind her, watching me with an expression I can only describe as careful joy. The kind of joy you hold gently because you're not sure yet how much weight it can bear. And then Marcus. He came forward immediately. His face was a masterclass in performed relief. Eyes slightly wet, hand reaching for mine. Voice breaking just enough. Diane, oh God, Diane, I'm so relieved. I looked at him. I held his gaze for exactly 1 second, and I did not let him see a single thing. Where am I? I said, my voice rough and strange from disuse. Hospital, he said. You were in an accident. You've been unconscious for 17 days. I nodded, slowly. I'm so tired, I said. Of course, he said. Of course you are. Don't worry about anything. I'm here. I'm right here. I closed my eyes. And while everyone in that room believed I was resting, I was cataloging. Every word he had said in that room over the past 17 days. Every name. Every number. Every plan. I was building the case. Dr. Marsh came to see me alone the following morning. She closed the door. She stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me with those careful, professional eyes. How are you feeling? She asked. Scared, I said. Which was true. She nodded. Then she said quietly, Diane, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Not with your family, not with your husband, with me. Okay. During your time unconscious, is there anything you can tell me about your level of awareness? A moment. I looked at her, and I said, I heard everything. She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She looked, if anything, like she had been waiting for me to say exactly those words. Okay, she said. There are things I need to tell you, I said, and I need to tell a lawyer before I tell anyone else. I know someone, she said immediately. She's good and discreet. This is the part where I want to stop and tell you something important. Finding Dr. Marsh was not luck. Or rather, it was luck the way that all of the best things in life are luck, meaning they are the result of someone who chose to show up. She showed up for me when my own family didn't. She fought for me when my own husband was fighting to end me. She handed me the thread that unraveled everything. If you are ever in a position to fight for someone who cannot fight for themselves, please, fight. You may not know what you're saving. The lawyer's name was Claire Donovan. She was 51, sharp-eyed, and had been doing estate fraud and elder financial abuse law for over 20 years. She specialized in exactly the kind of thing my family had attempted. She came to the hospital 3 days after I woke up, introduced herself as a friend of Dr. Marsh's, and sat across from me with a yellow legal pad, the same kind Marcus had used at the kitchen table to show me why we should consolidate our finances. I thought about that for a moment. Then I started talking. I talked for 2 hours. When I finished, Claire Donovan looked at her notes. Then she looked at me. You have a remarkable memory, she said. I had nothing else to do for 17 days, I said. She almost smiled. What do you want? She asked. Everything, I said. Every plan they made, every document Patricia drafted, every phone call Marcus made. I want all of it on record, and I want it done before he realizes I know. She nodded. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Your mother, she said carefully. What do you want where she's concerned? I thought about it. I thought about her voice in that room. You might be right. I thought about Sunday phone calls and carpool mornings and cards in cursive that said we love you. I want her to have to live with what she did, I said. Not jail, not lawyers. I want her to have to look at me every day knowing that she chose wrong. That's worse. Claire made a note. Okay, she said. Let's build your case. Over the next 3 weeks, while Marcus played devoted husband and brought me flowers and held my hand in front of nurses and posted updates on social media about my miraculous recovery, we worked. Claire obtained phone records through legal channels. She brought in a forensic financial investigator who began untangling what Marcus had been doing with our joint accounts over the past 18 months. She contacted the hospital administrator about the pressure that had been applied to Dr. Marsh and the attending physician. What we found was both worse and more complex than I had expected. Marcus had moved $87,000 from our joint account over 14 months. Small amounts, irregular intervals, designed to stay below the thresholds that trigger automatic review. He had opened a separate account in a name I didn't recognize and had been funneling money there. The life insurance policy, the one he referenced in that first conversation I overheard, had been updated to include a clause that would pay out $1.2 million in the event of my death. He had forged my signature on the updated beneficiary section. I had signed something in June, yes, but not that. He had used my signature from another document and transferred it. That is fraud. That is criminal fraud. Patricia had indeed drafted a power of attorney document, but it was contingent on a medical declaration of permanent incapacity, which Dr. Marsh had refused to provide and which was why Marcus had been trying to handle the doctor's situation. And Tyler, my brother, had received $15,000 from Marcus 6 weeks before my accident. Let me tell you something about that $15,000. I don't know what it was for. Tyler maintained later that it was a loan. Marcus maintained the same thing. There's no evidence it was payment for anything related to the accident, and I want to be very careful here, because I don't know, even now, what exactly happened on that road in October. The police had ruled it a single vehicle accident. Wet road, sharp curve, no other cars involved. The car had been examined, and no mechanical failure had been found. But Claire hired a private investigator, and the investigator found something that the initial report had missed or not prioritized. A witness. A man who had been walking his dog on that road that evening, who had seen, and then dismissed, and then remembered when asked directly. A car that had been parked on the shoulder just before the curve. Dark color, no plates visible, gone by the time the emergency services arrived. We couldn't prove anything. Not definitively, not enough for a criminal charge beyond reasonable doubt, but it changed the picture. It changed everything about how I understood what had happened to me on that road. I want to stop here and tell you something about fear. When I first understood the full scope of what Marcus had done, what he had planned, what he had potentially orchestrated, my first response was not anger, it was shame. I know how that sounds. It shouldn't have been. But that's how it works, isn't it? When someone betrays you this profoundly, there's a part of your brain that immediately turns inward and asks, what did you miss? What did you let happen? How did you not see this? I spent 3 days in a spiral of that shame, reviewing every moment, every conversation, every signed document. Every night I'd gone to sleep beside him not knowing. Claire came to see me on the 3rd day and found me staring at the wall. "Stop," she said. I should have... "Stop," she said again. He was very good at this. People who do what he did are good at it. That's not your failure, that's his crime. I signed things I didn't read. He created conditions where that felt safe, she said. He cultivated your trust specifically so he could exploit it. That's not naivety. That's someone being victimized by a sophisticated actor. I held on to those words. I still hold on to them. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Marcus came to collect me. He was everything he had always performed. Attentive, gentle. He brought a blanket for the car ride because he remembered I was always cold. He had flowers at home and a meal he'd apparently cooked, or ordered and transferred to Potts, knowing him, and he held my arm as I walked out of that hospital into the November air. He had no idea, not a single sign on my face, not a tremor in my hand, not one moment where he could have looked at me and known that I was not the fragile, recovering wife he believed me to be. I had spent 17 days learning to feel nothing on the outside. I was very good at it now. We got home, my grandmother's house, the house he had married me for. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment. The high ceilings, the light coming through the old windows, the smell, still somehow underneath everything, like lavender and old books. She left it to me because I was the only one who sat with her just to sit. "You okay?" Marcus said, his hand on my back. "I'm home," I said, which was the truest thing I had said to him in weeks. The first documents were filed 11 days later. Claire had moved quietly and efficiently, the way water moves, finding every gap, filling every space. She had filed for divorce on the grounds of fraud and financial abuse. She had submitted the forged signature evidence to the district attorney's office. She had provided the phone records and financial investigation to the insurance company's fraud division, which, and this I had not expected, had its own investigators, its own lawyers, and its own very significant interest in the fact that someone had attempted to commit a $1.2 million insurance fraud using a forged signature. The restraining order came first. I was at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had shown me his yellow legal pad and his 2 columns of numbers. When the sheriff's deputy arrived at the front door, Marcus went to answer it. I stayed at the table. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. I kept my face completely still. I heard the deputy's voice. Low, professional, official. I heard Marcus say, "What? What is this?" I heard the door, and then I heard Marcus's footsteps. Not his usual measured walk, but something faster, less controlled, coming toward the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway. He was holding the papers. He looked at me. And for the first time since I had known him, for the first time in the entire duration of our relationship, I saw something real on his face. Not the charm, not the performance, not the careful, calibrated Marcus who remembered my coffee order and brought me books and said, "I love you," with practiced sincerity. I saw the thing underneath. It was afraid. "Diane," he said. "You need to leave," I said. "Today." How did you— "I heard you," I said. "In the hospital. I heard everything." The papers in his hand. He didn't drop them, but his grip on them changed. Something left his body. "That's not— The doctor said you were—" "I know what the doctor said," I said. "And I know what you said. And I know what you did with $87,000 of our money. And I know about the insurance policy and the forged signature. And I know about Patricia's power of attorney. And I know about the $15,000 you gave Tyler." Silence. "I also know about a witness," I said, "on the road that night. And I know that the investigation has been reopened." That last part was a slight exaggeration of where things stood at that moment. But his face told me everything I needed to know about whether there was anything to find. Marcus set the papers down on the kitchen table very carefully. He straightened up. He looked at me for a long time. And then he said, "I want a lawyer." "Yes," I said. "I expect you do." He was out of the house within 2 hours. I had arranged it with Claire in advance. A police escort, just to ensure it happened cleanly. He took a bag of clothes. He did not take anything else. I stood at the window and watched him go. And then I sat down on the floor of my grandmother's house, the floor she had walked on for 40 years, the floor I used to sit on as a child while she read to me, and I let myself fall apart. Completely. Finally. For a long time. Patricia was next. The power of attorney document she had drafted was provided to the district attorney's office as evidence of a conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Because the document had been prepared in anticipation of exploiting my incapacity, specifically prepared to facilitate access to my estate while I was alive, but unable to consent, it constituted part of a larger pattern that the DA found very interesting. Patricia was not charged criminally. The evidence wasn't quite there for that, but she became a named party in the civil suit, and the civil suit was very detailed and very public. Her name appeared in the local paper. For Patricia, a woman whose entire identity was constructed around respectability and the appearance of good standing in her community, I believe that was its own sentence. Tyler reached out to me 4 weeks after Marcus left. He wanted to talk. He said he needed me to understand his side of things. He said the money from Marcus had been a loan, that he hadn't known everything Marcus had planned, that he had tried to slow things down. I met him for coffee, because he's my brother, and because I wanted to look at him and know whether what he was saying was true. He cried. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know about the insurance fraud or the forged signature. He said when Marcus first came to him, the conversation was about making sure Diane's affairs were in order, and it wasn't until later that he began to understand the shape of what was actually happening. And by then, he told himself, the doctors were saying I might not recover, and the debt was real, and the money from Marcus had already been spent, and he ran out of excuses. He looked at me across the coffee shop table, red-eyed and small. I know, he said finally. I know there's no good reason. I know that. No, I said. There isn't. Are you going to— I'm not pressing any charges against you, I said, because I can't prove criminal intent beyond the circumstantial, and because you are my brother, and because I choose to believe that some part of you knew it was wrong from the beginning, and that part of you is the part sitting here right now. He exhaled. But Tyler, I said, and I held his gaze until he couldn't look away. I need you to hear me. If you ever make a choice like that again, about me or about anyone, I will not be generous twice. He nodded. He couldn't speak. And you're going to pay back every cent of that $15,000, I said. Not to me, to a domestic violence shelter in this city. You're going to find one, you're going to call them, and you're going to make the donation in our grandmother's name. He blinked. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I'll do that. He did do it. I know because I checked. My mother. This is the one I want to tell you about most carefully, because this is the one that was most complicated. And because I promised to tell this story honestly. My mother called me 3 weeks after Marcus left. She had heard through the family network about the divorce filing, about Patricia. She did not know yet about the full scope of what I had overheard. She wanted to meet. She called it lunch, because my mother calls everything something softer than it is. A confrontation becomes a conversation. A crisis becomes a situation. An act of betrayal becomes lunch. I met her at a restaurant she chose. Somewhere nice, because Sandra does not discuss painful things in places that are not nice. She looked older. I noticed that first. Or maybe I was just seeing her differently. We sat across from each other. We ordered. We performed normalcy through the arrival of water and the reviewing of menus and the placing of orders. And then I said, I know what you said in my hospital room. Her face. She set down her water glass. Diane, you said he might be right. When Marcus talked about whether to keep me on life support, that's not— She stopped. I was scared. I didn't know what they were. What did you think he meant? I asked. When he talked about the insurance and the house, what did you think was happening? She was quiet. Mom, I didn't think— A long pause. He made it sound like you had talked about it, that you had said you wouldn't want to be kept alive if— Did you ask him when I had said that? She was quiet. Did you ask him for any evidence? Did you push back at all? Did you call his story into question for one single moment? She looked at the table. No, she said. Why not? A long silence. Because I was afraid, she said, of him, of the situation, of feeling like I didn't know what was right and someone was telling me something definitive. He was so certain and I was so— She pressed her lips together. I've never handled uncertainty well. You know that. I know, I said. I've always known that about you. She looked up. I'm not forgiving you today, I said. I want to be honest with you. I'm not there yet. But I'm telling you what happened because you deserve to know what almost happened to your daughter. And because I need you to understand that being certain isn't the same as being right, and that someone who loves you doesn't need your permission to live. She started to cry. Quietly, the way my mother cries. Carefully, like even grief is something to be managed. I'm so sorry, Diane, she said. I know, I said. We sat there together, not forgiven, not healed, but still there. Still sitting across from each other. Maybe that was something. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. Marcus's criminal case, fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit financial abuse, moved through the system slowly, the way these things do. He hired a good lawyer. He pushed back on every element. He maintained to the end that the signed beneficiary form was legitimate, that the financial transfers were marital expenses, that he had been a devoted husband overwhelmed by a terrifying situation. He was a good liar. He had always been a good liar. But I had been listening for 17 days, and I had a very good memory. And Claire Donovan had 22 years of experience dismantling exactly this kind of story. He pled guilty to the forgery charge, the forged signature on the insurance policy, and received 18 months probation and a $50,000 fine. The insurance fraud case was dropped as part of the plea agreement, which frustrated me more than I can fully express. But Claire told me something that helped. "He'll never be able to do this again without a record following him," she said. "Every financial institution, every future partner, every background check, it's there." "That's not enough," I said. "No," she said. "It rarely is. But it's something." The civil case was more satisfying. We won a judgment for $187,000, the $87,000 he had moved from our accounts, plus damages, plus legal fees. He would be paying that back for years. The house, my grandmother's house, remained mine throughout. He had never succeeded in transferring the deed or establishing any legal claim to it. The lawyers he had consulted about doing so, it turned out, had declined the work. One of them, I later heard, had specifically said the plan had too many vulnerabilities. I think about that lawyer sometimes. I don't know his name, but somewhere there is a man who decided that some things weren't worth doing, and that decision is a small piece of why I'm still in this house. I want to tell you about a morning, about 8 months after I was discharged from the hospital. It was early, May, the kind of morning that's cool still, but promises warmth. The light coming in at a low angle through the old windows of my grandmother's house, landing on the floor in long, bright rectangles. I was sitting at the kitchen table. Coffee. Just me. The right temperature, no sugar, just a little too hot. I was working on a design project, a new client, a small business, someone who had found me through a referral. Nothing dramatic, just work. And I sat there in the light and the quiet, and I thought about 17 days of darkness, of hearing my husband discuss my death like a financial opportunity, of my mother's voice saying you might be right, of my brother's hand on mine and his justifications that ran out of road, of the cold understanding that settled into me and became, somehow, not despair, but determination. I thought about Dr. Marsh, who fought for me when no one else would. I thought about Claire, with her yellow legal pad. I thought about Kara, the nurse who noticed a finger move 3 millimeters to the left and said, "Oh," and then went to get help. I thought about my grandmother, who left me her house because I was the only one who ever sat with her just to sit, not to ask for anything, just to be there. And I thought, I'm still here, in her house, at her table, in the light she used to sit in, still here. There's one more thing I want to tell you. 6 months after everything was settled, I went back to the hospital. I brought flowers, lavender, because of course, and I asked at the nurse's station for Dr. Marsh. She came out to the lobby. She looked surprised to see me, and then she looked the way she had looked in my room that first day she spoke to me. That careful, held gently joy. I gave her the flowers. She looked at them for a moment. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." We talked for a while. She told me, now that it was over, that she had known something was wrong with the picture being presented. Not just medically, but with the family dynamics, the pressure, the way certain people behaved in that room. That her instinct had told her to stay, to fight, even when she was being managed and pressured and told she was making things harder for a grieving family. "Did you know I could hear?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know for certain," she said, "but I thought, I've had patients over the years where the metrics don't fully explain what's happening, and I've learned to act as though they might be aware, because if they can hear you and you treat them like they can't..." She paused. "That's its own kind of harm." I thought about that. "You changed everything," I said. "You woke up," she said. "That was you." "You gave me time," I said. "That was you." She didn't argue. I'm telling you this story because it happened to me. And because the version of this story that almost existed, the one where Marcus's plan worked, where the machines were turned off, where a forged signature on an insurance policy became a transaction that nobody ever questioned, that version could have been my whole story. 32 years old, a woman who loved good coffee and quiet mornings, and her grandmother's house. Gone, turned into a number on a policy document. That story didn't happen. This story happened instead. And I think that's worth something. I think that's worth saying out loud, in a room, to anyone who will listen. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not anger, not revenge. Those things had their season, and I let them. What I want to leave you with is this. Listen to what people show you. Not what they say, what they show you. The jaw that tightens when you don't give them what they want. The questions about worth that come before questions about love. The ease with which they make plans that center themselves. Listen to the people who fight for you when you cannot fight for yourself. Remember their names. Bring them lavender. And if you are ever in the dark, if you ever find yourself in a place where you cannot move, cannot speak, cannot make yourself known, hold on. Be still. Gather what you can. And wait for the moment. Because the moment will come. And when it does, you move your finger. 3 millimeters. And everything changes. If this story meant something to you, if it stayed with you the way some stories do, I'd ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is in a hard place, someone who has forgotten what it means to fight for themselves. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can give each other is the reminder that other people have been in the dark and found their way out. And if you have your own story, your own 17 days of silence and survival, I hope you know that I'm listening. I'll always be listening.